Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Am's Untitled Podcast. I'm Am. Hi, if I've never met you before and you've just stumbled across my podcast, I recently started this podcast maybe about 2 months ago now, and it's just basically because I feel like I say this every single time I do an episode. It's because I enjoy rambling, and I know that there's definitely people out there who are huge bookworms like myself who love rambling about their favorite things. For Christ's sake, I look one way away from my phone, I put it to the side so I can concentrate on doing this. Nobody has messaged me all morning, and now everybody wants my help. Oh well, they'll just have to wait. I'm recording this. This is more important. So, in the last episode, I reviewed the first half of the Lightning Thief book. So I did the first 12 chapters. So if you haven't heard that review, go back. I think it's episode 10, and listen to that first, because obviously I'm not going to go back over the stuff that's already happened. I'm going to carry on from chapter 13 all the way till the end. So if you want to hear my thoughts and feelings on the first half of the book, you'll have to go back. Just before I get into this, I did the first half of the Sea of Monsters book. I've been taking the notes for it because that will be the next episode. But yeah, I've really been enjoying it. And you know what? I feel like I'm going to find it really difficult to choose a favorite at the end. I always thought like Last Olympian was my favorite, but I don't know. I feel like that might change as I'm doing this podcast. Like maybe that might change. I'm not sure. But yeah, and I thought that maybe instead, because I had a look at how thick book 4 and 5 is, because there's a lot that happens in book 4 and 5 that I can talk about. So what I was thinking of is, you know how I've split these two books in two parts? For those books, I might split them in three parts. So I'll do a third of the story each time. I think that might just work better. So yeah, the next, oh God, how many episodes is it going to be? The next few episodes, we'll just say the next few, are just dedicated to the Percy Jackson series, the first 5 books. I'm still debating whether I'm going to do Chalice of the Gods. I feel like I should. Like, I know Chalice of the Gods comes after the Heroes of Olympus books, but I don't. Do you know what it is with Heroes of Olympus? There's so many point of views. The books are so thick. Like, I'm not sure if I would go back to them. Like, as much as I love them, I'm not sure if you guys would want to hear me review them because there's a lot that happens and there's so many different points of view, so many different characters. So yeah, let me know if the Heroes of Olympus are something that you guys would like to hear about. Let me know. As of now, I'm just thinking of doing the first 5 and Chalice of the Gods, and then maybe I'm gonna move on to another book. Um, oh, for God's sake. If you can hear my phone pinging in the background, I'm so sorry. I need to put it on silent because I can't concentrate while I'm trying to do this. Anyway, let's carry on. So, chapter 13 is I Plunge to My Death. And the chapter opens on the Amtrak train where Percy realizes that he's being chased down by the police. Obviously, he's been associated with the disappearance of his mom, so the police are on his tail, in other words. And then Annabeth tells Percy that her father resents her basically, and she talks about obviously her stepfamily. Now, if you don't know, like Annabeth has a stepmother and 2 brothers, I believe, but she doesn't really get along with them. And then, she tells him the story about how she ended up at Camp Half-Blood. And then a little bit further on in the chapter, she talks more about her love for architecture, which is a huge part of her character. It's the thing that she aspires to do, essentially. And, they end up in St. Louis. Percy comes face to face with the next big bad in this chapter. And then first, the trio meets an old woman and her chihuahua, which little bit of a hint is the next big bad that they're going to face. And it's basically Echidna, who is the mother of monsters in Greek mythology. So all the monsters that they've come across so far are her children. And the chihuahua is actually the chimera. I don't really know how to describe the chimera. Like, it's kind of I don't know how you describe it. It's a mythical creature, basically. If you Google it, you'll be able to see a picture. I'm not very good at describing things, so you're just gonna have to deal with me just being like, it's the chimera. And Percy actually gets stung by one of its stingers, and he starts being well. It basically it's poisoned his system. In other words, so he's really weak and he's fighting by himself because Annabeth and Grover. He's told them to. I don't really He's kind of told them to just wait there while he went to the top of the arch, basically. And she says like, "Oh, if you're the son of the sea god," she blasts a hole into the floor, and she says, "Oh, if you really believe, then jump." In other words, and Percy makes a prayer to his father for help, and he jumps into the Mississippi River. Now, the funniest thing about this is the St. Louis Arch is so unbelievably far away from the river, and Rick actually said that he thought that the river was directly under the St. Louis Arch. So yeah, it's kind of like, for imaginative purposes, you just have to imagine that the water is underneath, but in actual real life, if anybody hasn't been to the St. Louis Arch, the water is actually behind. I think, is it to the side of it or behind it? It's quite far away, essentially. But for Percy Jackson series, I'm gonna forgive Rick for that because he's one of my favorite writers. So I'm just gonna forgive him for that mistake. And then chapter 14 is I Become a Known Fugitive. So basically, the water catches Percy and saves him. So it's basically his father has saved him. And as Percy is in the water, he meets a narrator that tells him to go to Santa Monica, and she tells him something really important, which is that his father believes in him. He believes that Percy is doing the right thing. And then, obviously, at this point, Grover and Annabeth don't know where Percy is. He disappeared and he's not come back. And then, as he comes out of the water, he comes out completely bone dry, which is a part of his character. Obviously, he's the son of the sea god; he doesn't get wet, in other words. And then Grover and Annabeth realize that he's actually alive, and Grover goes and hugs him, which is so sweet. And Annabeth just stands there. She's too proud to go up to him and hug him, even though she cares. Anyway, yeah, and then they see a bunch of news reporters because obviously the St. Louis Arch was on fire. They There's a woman that says, "Oh, he's the kid that set the that set the arch on fire," and the news reporters try to chase after them, and then the trio jumps on the next train that leaves St. Louis behind, and that's how the chapter ends. I forgot to mention before I start talking about this chapter, if you haven't heard the first part, I'm basically just summarizing the main points in the chapters. Obviously, you'll have to read the books to have the best knowledge. I'm just summarizing like the main bits in the chapters, and I'm going to talk about some of my favorite bits, some of my favorite chapters, maybe chapters that I'm not so keen on, but there's a reason why Rick has put all these chapters in. And yeah. So yeah, if you were confused as to what I was doing, which you might be if you haven't heard the first review, that's how I've decided to segregate the books. Okay, then comes chapter 15, which is one of my favorites, which is A God Buys Us Cheeseburgers. And it's 7 days before the summer, 7 days before the summer solstice, and Annabeth wants to contact Chiron via iris message. So if you don't know what an iris message is, it's basically the way demigods communicate because they can't use phones, in other words. And it's actually Luke that answers the message. Now, this is very important because why is Luke answering Chiron's messages? Why is he poking around in Chiron's office, is what I'm wondering. And he gives the excuse that Chiron is actually dealing with campers who are arguing because obviously there's going to be a war. The cabins are choosing sides, whether they're going to be Team Zeus or Team Poseidon. So he says Chiron is dealing with that, which is a sort of believable excuse, but also not a believable excuse. And then, Luke tells Percy that Hades used his helm of darkness, which turns you invisible, to steal the Master Bolt. And then he asks about his winged shoes, and he goes, I hope that they're serving you well. And it's so funny that he mentions the importance of those winged shoes, because obviously, like, if you haven't caught on yet, I don't know what bigger hint you could possibly need. And it's just like they're a gift that Hermes gave Luke, and Hermes is Luke's father, and he hates him, is the only way I can put it. But yeah, I was Rick is so clever in the way that he drops hints, because when I read it for the first time, things like this didn't occur to me. But because this is my third time reading it, I'm like, huh, interesting. Because obviously I know what's happened. I know all the spoilers. I know exactly who the Lightning Thief is. I know what the significance of Luke is in the entire storyline. But yeah, it's a nice little hint to people who are reading it for the first time, like, oh, this guy, there's something not right about him. And eventually the trio ends up at a diner and they meet a mysterious biker. He knows that Percy is Poseidon's son, and he And basically, Percy manages to realize it's Ares. If you don't know who Ares is the god of war. He's also Clarice's father. That's an important detail to remember for Sea of Monsters, but I'll come back to that in the next episode. And, Ares offers him quest to prove his bravery. Now, Ares is a bloody liar, can I just say? Throughout this, like, he is one of the most annoying gods that you'll meet in this franchise. Like, he's just like, he's one of those people that's just like, you just want to punch them. Like, you love to hate them. And Uncle Rick is very clever in the way he creates characters. And he tells them to retrieve his shield from an amusement park. And obviously Percy, Annabeth, and Guru are like, "Why can't you do it yourself?" And he's like, "Oh, it's just a chance for you to prove your bravery." Blah blah blah. Basically, any excuse to avoid doing something himself. And Annabeth says a really iconic line, which I really like, and it's probably one of my favorite lines from the books, which is, "Sometimes strength has to bow down to wisdom." Now that is an incredible line. I don't know how Rick came up with it. It is an amazing line. I love it, and it's true. Like sometimes the physical strength does have to bow down to your brain. You have to use your brain. If you don't have a brain, it ain't gonna work. It's basically what she's saying. So what she's saying is Ares is all muscle. He's nothing. He's nothing because he doesn't have any sort of brain. Essentially, love Annabeth. This is why she's my favorite character. Like she just says it how it is. She's not afraid, and her lines are just absolutely iconic. And then the trio ends up at Waterland, which is the amusement park that Ares was talking about, and they discover that there's been an affair going on. Well, 3,000 years of affairs between Aphrodite and Ares. But Aphrodite is actually Hephaestus's wife. Now, if you don't know who Hephaestus is, he's the god of craftsmen, and Aphrodite is the goddess of love. They had an arranged marriage, and they don't really get along, essentially. That's the only thing, and she's having a fling with Ares on the side. Just so you know, there's so many affairs in Greek mythology, it's unbelievable. But yeah, that's just one little affair that is very important in the storyline. And then eventually they find the ride Tunnel of Love, which is where Ares lost his shield. They try to retrieve the shield, but actually, in other words, they realize that they're just on live on Olympus for the gods' entertainment. Ares has basically sent them there, A, to waste their time, and B, just to piss them off. And, oh, shit, sorry, got the notebook on the floor, that's not good. Anyway, Rick goes in, they get attacked by these mechanical spiders. Obviously, Hephaestus is the god of craftsmen, so he builds this trap basically, hoping that Ares would get caught in it, but it was actually Annabeth, Grover, and Percy that get stuck. Annabeth saves Percy from being crushed, and Grover eventually saves both of them using the wing shoes. And that's where the chapter sort of ends. Now, chapter 6, why can't I talk? Chapter 16 is we take a zebra to Vegas. So the trio confronts Ares. They've realized what Ares has done. He was doing this not only to waste their time, but to embarrass them in front of all of the gods. Ares tells them to go get into a truck that is going to drive them to Las Vegas, which is where the underworld is. Oh, well, yeah, essentially, that's where they think it is, essentially. And then Ares tells Percy that his mother is still alive. Because up until this point, Percy doesn't know that Sally's alive. He's convinced that she's dead, which is understandable. Like the Minotaur crushed her. Like that's it. Like that would be the end of the life for any mortal, essentially. But he finds out that she's actually alive and she was snatched by Hades. And then Ares tells them that he will meet Percy again. Now that's such a big bomb because he does appear again slightly later on in the chapters. But yeah, that is important. That one detail is very important. And then Annabeth tells Percy that she's sorry, and about what happened, when they got trapped. Because obviously she's got arachnophobia, and if you don't know why, it's because Athena and Arachne they had a bit of a dispute, and ever since then, all of her children suffer fear of spiders, essentially, and that's what Annabeth has. And that gets touched on more in Heroes of Olympus, particularly the book Mark of Athena. The whole rivalry between Arachne and Athena, Rick goes into so much more detail in those books. So if you want to know more about that, I recommend checking out Heroes of Olympus. Very, very good set of books, honestly, very good. And then Percy finds out about Thalia, And Annabeth opens up to Percy about her father because obviously, you know, she's she's been abandoned by almost everybody she knows. Like obviously her mum has been not present, you could say. Her dad begged her mum to take her back when she arrived in a cradle in front of his house. Her stepmom's not interested in her, her step siblings are. She's basically been neglected her entire life, and that is such a big part of what makes her character. And the fact that she's even opening up to Percy about this is such a big thing. And oh, my little shipping heart can't take it. Like I honestly, I read these books just because I get to go back and find the foundation of their love story. They have so many underrated moments, like between them. The things that they say to each other is so sweet. And just I love seeing them going from strangers to sort of acquaintances to at this point, I think they're friends. Like it's still a little bit iffy, but they're friends. They're definitely friends. And the trio finds out that the animals that are on the truck with them that are going to Las Vegas are illegally trafficked. So Grover basically says that he's very sensitive when it comes to animals. Of course he would be, and he says we need to set them free. And what's really fun about this, and what I love about this, is that a zebra actually speaks to Percy. And if you remember, when Percy is claimed by his father, there is one thing that Chiron says about him. Let me go back to that scene. It's not that chapter. He says, Earthshaker, Stormbringer, father of horses, which means that obviously one of Poseidon's ability is to be able to talk to horses, and a zebra is kind of like a horse. And I'm not American, by the way, so I'm not going to say zebra. I'm not American. I'm from the UK. I'm English, so I'm going to say it's a zebra. And obviously, that might sound weird. If you're listening from the United States, you're probably thinking, "What the hell's a zebra? It's not a zebra. I'm not calling it a zebra. That doesn't sound right." Um, and yeah, it sort of speaks to Percy and begs him to set them free, essentially. And then once the truck stops and all the animals have been released, the trio ends up outside the Lotus Casino and Hotel. And they go around this hotel, and there's more details, like they sort of freshen up and stuff, and they come downstairs, and Percy meets a boy there called Darwin. Is that what his name is? I don't even have the book on me. I didn't write it very well. My handwriting's gone really bad. Since I started uni and I've been typing things, my writing has gone atrocious. Like, I actually can't read my own writing. And Percy asks him, like, "Oh, what year is it?" And he says the year is 1977. And Percy realizes, okay, there's something going on here, like 1977, like that's not right. And then he eventually starts asking around everywhere, like what year do people think it is? And he's getting different answers, and he's wondering what's going on. And he realizes this place is actually a trap. People that go in don't come back out again. And he tries to find Annabeth because he's lost Annabeth, excuse me. And the trio exits the casino. He manages to find Grover as well and drag him out, and realizes that they've actually been stuck at the casino for 5 days, and they only have one day left to finish the quest. And the reason why is because they pump lotus flower into the air, so people don't realize the time that's passing, and they get trapped there essentially. So that's where the chapter sort of finishes off. Chapter 17 is we shop for waterbeds. So the trio get into a cab and head for Santa Monica, which is obviously where the narrator told Percy to go. And then Percy tells them about his dreams and that he can feel that there's something more dangerous going on, like more than this quest to retrieve the Master Ball, or more than the war between Zeus and Poseidon. There's something else, like there's something even bigger and even worse that's happening in the background. And then it's so funny because Percy meets a shark at the Pacific Ocean, and he sees, what the does that say? I don't even know what that says. Oh yeah, and he once they get to Santa Monica, he sort of goes into the water with the shark, and he meets the narrator again, and she tells him that um his father isn't here, but she gives him two pearls, not two, three. And she says, don't be so harsh on him. Like, he did genuinely want to meet you. It's just that with the war coming, this isn't a war that Poseidon wanted. He's been accused of stealing something. He hasn't. So he needs to prepare for that, is basically what she's saying. And, she tells him to listen to his heart, and that will give him the right answer to complete the quest, essentially. And then Annabeth eventually comes out the water, and he shows the pills to Annabeth and Grover. And she said, "So what price did you have to pay for the gift?" And Percy said, "Oh no, I didn't have to pay anything." And then she says a really good line where she's like, "No gift comes without a price." And that is so important, that one dialogue, which in the next few chapters will become more apparent as to why she said that. And then the trio eventually ends up outside Krusty's waterbed palace after being chased by a gang of kids. So as they're walking towards um where they need to be, they get attacked by a bunch of kids, and they end up running into this waterbed shop for just protection, basically. And then they meet a strange, weird-looking man called Krusty, and then eventually he says, "Oh, try out my water beds, blah, blah, blah." He pushes Annabeth down, and her and Grover gets trapped in the beds. And then Krusty eventually admits to Percy that he's Procrustes, so he's the murderer of travelers, and he's also a son of Poseidon. And, Percy's like, "Oh, why don't you try the beds out for yourself?" And he pushes him onto the beds, and he gets trapped, and then he sets Grover and Annabeth free. And that's where the chapter comes to an end. Chapter 18, which is Annabeth does an obedience school. So the trio, so if you didn't know, the gate to the underworld the hidden passage to the underworld was in Krusty's bed shop. So it was just in a separate door. And then the trio finds their way into the underworld, and they meet Cheiron, who is the boatman. So basically he takes the souls that are dead across the river Styx so they can begin their life in the underworld, essentially. And they tell him, and he says, "How did you guys die?" And this is one of my favorite bits from the trio. Like, one of my favorite moments of them is they tell him that they drowned in a bathtub, and he says, "What? All three of you?" And they were like, "Yeah, it was a really big bathtub." They're not very good at coming up with believable lies. Let's just put it like that. And they eventually bribe him into letting them cross the river Styx. So they get on the boat with all the dead souls, basically. And there's one bit where Annabeth grabs a hold of Percy's hand, and she does that basically for reassurance. Whenever she's scared, or she just is feeling a little bit vulnerable, or she just needs to know that there's somebody there, she tends to grab for their hand, or she like squeezes their arm or something just to keep them safe. And it's just a little Percabeth moment. I love them. I love them so much. And you know what I love about? Let's go on a bit of a Percabeth tangent here. The reason why I love them so much is because um I don't know how to say this. They just have these little things, like, and it's not like big milestones in a relationship where it's like, "Oh, I love you this, I love you that," or they're constantly making out and stuff like that's not, to me, that doesn't scream like an amazing relationship. Whereas these two, they have just this intense emotional connection that I just can't put into words. Like, I don't know what it is about them that just stands out to me, but they have these little moments that make them so special. And it's just moments like this, when she's just reaching out for his hand and stuff. It just shows that she trusts him already, and she feels this bond towards him, even though she doesn't have to explicitly say it. Like, you as an audience member, as you're reading it, you can see that she's becoming more and more comfortable with him, and she feels safe around him, which I think is the main thing. And what I love is that their fatal flaws are like, you know, she's, well, not their fatal flaws, but Percy's fatal flaw is loyalty, his personal loyalty, the fact that he would do anything for somebody he cares about. And, he wouldn't leave Annabeth. And this is a girl who's been abandoned by everybody she loves. And now she's got Percy, somebody who won't leave her side no matter what. So they just complete each other. And like, as much as it kills me, like, I'm such an unromantic person, like, it's very hard for me to get into romance. Like, I don't really like it. I find it quite cringy. But when it comes to these two, like, I just love the way Rick has created this really nice slow burn, and he's created this dynamic that I've never seen before, which I love. I love with my whole heart. I really, really appreciate the way he's created these two characters. That is why they are my favorite love story of all time. They are the greatest ship of all time, and I love them immensely. Anyway, let's go back to what else happens in the chapter. And then the trio meet Cerberus. So Cerberus is a three-headed dog that guards the underworld, basically. and he starts chasing them, but Annabeth manages to tame him using a little red ball. It's a trick that she learned because her dad used to have a dog, and she manages to tame him, and she throws the ball, and eventually the trio escapes. Chapter 19, which is also a very important chapter, is we find out the truth, sort of. And the chapter opens up at the fields of Asphodel. And this is, if you don't know where Asphodel is, it's where souls are tormented by the choices or the choices that they didn't make in their lives, essentially. And, the winged shoes start lifting Grover up and dragging him into the pits of Tartarus. Now, if you don't know where Tartarus is, that's where Kronos has been thrown. He was chopped into a million pieces by Zeus and thrown there as punishment. And, um, Annabeth and Percy manage to grab him, and the shoes go flying off into Tartarus. But thankfully, Grover stays there. And eventually they get to Hades' palace and meet him, basically. Percy asks Hades to return the Master Bolt to stop the war. But eventually they find out that Hades didn't actually steal the Master Bolt, and that actually the reason why he's angry with Percy is because he thinks he used his Helm of Darkness and he stole it. And then, Hades gets really angry. He's like, "How dare you accuse me when you actually had the Master Bolt on you?" And obviously Percy's not understanding, and he takes his backpack off, which is a backpack which I forgot to mention Ares gave to him, and he finds the Master Bolt inside there. And then Hades tells him that he actually stole his mother to draw him to the underworld so that he would return the Master Bolt. I mean, not the Master Bolt, his Helm of Darkness. And then another thing is that when Grover got attacked, he lost one of the pearls. So there's only two pearls. So he says to Annabeth and Percy that he'd stay behind to save them. And obviously Percy won't let that happen under any circumstances. And Percy tells um his mum. Actually, no, he doesn't lose the pearl. Sorry, my bad. I'm thinking about the show. That's not what happened. Um, Obviously, there's only three pearls, so each pearl compensates for one person. So he says to Percy that I'll stay behind, so you can use the other pearl to free your mom. That's it. I'm thinking of the show for a second there. I got confused. Anyway, and yeah, Percy tells his mother that he'll come back for her. And he tells Hades that he'll find his helm and see it returned to him, and they use the pearls to escape out of the underworld. And they land on a beach in Santa Monica, the day of the summer solstice. So this is the day that they were supposed to return um, the Master Ball. Sorry, moment of disruption there. It's fine. We're going to carry on. Yeah, and that's basically where the chapter for that one sort of ends. And it's got to be one of my favorite chapters because Hades is such a miserable ass. It's so funny. He's so he's so angry all the time. It makes me laugh. I love it. It's hilarious. Anyway, Uh, also, Uncle Rick's description of Hades' palace is really cool. Like, I wish I took some more notes actually, but yeah, read it. It's great. Chapter 20 is I battle my jerk relative. So obviously, a little hint to the audience that Ares is coming back. The chapter opens at the Santa Monica Pier. Ares comes back, and he tells Percy that he wanted to steal the Master Bolt to start a war between Zeus and Poseidon and Hades. Ares tells him such a big thing, which is, oh, gods don't dream, because Percy's realizing that, oh, the voice that he's been hearing from his dreams, if it wasn't Hades, then who is it? It's going to be the person who has the biggest grudge of all, which is Kronos, right? And Ares tells him that the gods don't dream, and he uses a boar to attack Percy. So a boar is, what is it, like a massive pig, I guess? I don't think there's really any other way to describe it. And Percy manages to defeat it. And then he challenges Ares to single combat for the helm and to return the Master Bolt so he can take it to Olympus, essentially, if he draws first blood. Annabeth gives Percy her necklace, which has got her dad's college ring on it, and just for luck, basically. And that's such a significant Percy death moment because that necklace, Annabeth hasn't taken it off. She wouldn't give it to anybody else. But her taking it off and giving it to Percy is basically telling him that, she believes in him and she does trust him and that she wants him to be safe. It's such a big moment in the books. Yeah, and it's a really good start to their relationship of what it's eventually going to become, essentially. And then Percy draws first blood by slashing Ares's heel in the fight. And Ares eventually disappears, and Mrs. Dodds, who was Percy's teacher, who's actually one of Hades's lieutenants, appears to retrieve the helm so she can take it to her master. And then Percy tells her that he expects Hades to keep up his end of the deal. You know, Percy's done the right thing, he's given his helm back, but he's expecting Hades to give his mother back in return for that. And then the chapter sort of ends with Percy telling Annabeth and Grover to go back to camp and that he has to complete the quest, even though he's missed the deadline. He has to fly to New York. He has to fly to New York to give the bolt back, essentially. And then chapter 21 is I Settle My Tab, which is Ares gets blamed by the media because as they're fighting, which is something I forgot to mention in the last chapter, a bunch of mortals see them. So they, they basically reported the news that they were having a fight, which is really funny. And then Percy and the trio board the plane where there's a lot of turbulence, obviously because Zeus is very angry. Percy hasn't returned the Master Ball in the time that is given to them. And sort of he tells them to go back to camp, but I don't think he does. I think that's in the show. You see, watching the show and then reading the book has confused me because I'm like, oh, this happens in the show, but that doesn't happen in the book. Anyway, Percy tells Annabeth and Grover just before, he tells him here to go back to Camp Half-Blood. So I wasn't completely off it. I just said it is the wrong chapter. And then Percy arrives at the Empire State Building, which is below Mount Olympus. So you have to use the building to get to the top. And he tells the doorman that he has Zeus's Master Bolt and he wants to return it. And then he goes up in the lift, the 600th floor, which is Olympus. Percy meets Zeus and Poseidon. They're both sat there in the throne room. And, it's basically, this scene is really sad because when Poseidon meets Percy, he says that I have admitted to my wrongdoing because obviously Percy is a forbidden child, like he shouldn't have been born, but Poseidon broke that oath. And it must be so heartbreaking. He's basically telling Percy that he was a mistake. And that's so sad. Like I remember reading that for the first time. I think I teared up a little bit. I was like, oh my God, how can you say that to your own child? That's awful. Yeah. Um Percy basically gives them an overview of what's happened. He talks about his dreams and the things and that Hades didn't steal a bolt and blah blah blah. And then Percy finds out that it's actually Kronos that was calling out to him in his dreams that needed his help to take down Olympus. I've got a really twitchy nose. It's so hard to concentrate on what I'm saying with a twitchy nose. Anyway, and then Poseidon tells Percy that Hades has returned his mother home, which is such a huge relief. Like this is the reason why he was on the quest originally. It was to save his mom. Like he wanted to do everything he can to save her. It's such a big thing. And Poseidon talks to Percy about his mother. He calls her the queen amongst women. So it does show that he did truly have feelings for Sally. And they are the original star-crossed lovers in Greek mythology, you could say. Well, Rick Riordan's version of Greek mythology. And he apologizes to Percy. He says, I'm so sorry you were born. Like, I've given you a hero's fate. And 95% of the time, like, heroes in Greek mythology don't have good ends, essentially. And just before he goes back to Camp Half-Blood, after he's spoken to his father, he goes straight to New York to visit his mom and make sure she's actually there. And obviously, Smelly Gabe's still there, and he tries to hit Sally. And obviously, Percy doesn't know how long this has been going on for. And, Percy asks his mom, like, do you want to get rid of him? Like, there's a way to get rid of him. Poseidon has already warned him that he's going to be given a choice that can affect the rest of his life, essentially. And, Sally tells him that, you're just like your father. Like, there's so many attributes of him that I see in you. And Percy tells her that I need to go back to camp. And she tells him something which is so sweet. She says that, you're going to be one of the greatest heroes of all time. Like, she's always believed in her child, and it's so sweet. Like, that kind of love that they both have is so rare. Rick has created this incredible relationship that she is basically the backbone of this book. The reason why Percy does what he does is to save his mum. She's been his main purpose throughout this book, which I love. And, um, he got the box that he sent to Olympus with Medusa's head in it. he is basically has been returned to him, and Sally opens the box and it turns Smelly Gabe into a statue, basically. Chapter 22, which is the last chapter in the book, I believe. Yeah, yeah, is the prophecy comes true, which obviously is going to be the most important chapter. Everything that's led up to this moment, everything that's happened so far is leading up to this big finale. And the trio basically arrive back at Camp Half-Blood. Sally tells Percy about Gabe's mysterious disappearance and that there is a statue of him in a museum. And she tells him, I found another school for you. Like, if you did want to come back from camp and you didn't want to stay there, like, I can send you to another school for seventh grade. Grover comes to say goodbye because obviously he's been officially authorized by the Cloven Council of Elders to go and search for Pan. Pan is the god of the wild that went missing a few years ago, and nobody's ever found him. And it's been Grover's life mission to find him. I talked more about that in part one of this book review. And Annabeth just basically she's basically behaving like a mom, and she's like, "Have you got this? Have you got that?" And he's like, "You're like an old mama goat," and it's so sweet. It's nice to see her being protective of Grover because Grover and her have a history. Like long before she met Percy, she's known Grover for the longest time, and they have such a lovely relationship. And I'm so happy that Rick has created such a good dynamic between the two of them as well. And Percy's a little bit sad, so Annabeth reassures him that we're going to see him again. She's giving him hope basically that she's going to see him again, even though no searcher has ever come back. Percy gets his first bead, and it's got the trident on it, which I also have on my Camp Half-Blood necklace, which you guys can't see because it's a podcast. But yeah, there's a picture of it on my Instagram if you want to see it. It's a photo of me in my Percy Jackson Eras Tour sweatshirt, and I've got my necklace on. So if you want to see what that bead looks like, it's on there. And Percy feels like he finally has a family, like he finally has found his place in the world, and this is where he's supposed to be at Camp Half-Blood. Mr. D is asking Percy, so he's basically sent out a form to ask all the campers whether they're going to be staying for the rest of the year, or if they're going to go home and come back next summer. And before Percy can respond to that, he starts walking around and he finds Luke training quite aggressively. And he can see that Luke is pissed off, but he can't understand why. And Percy, when he's talking to Luke, Luke shows him Backbiter, which is his sword, which is half celestial bronze to kill obviously monsters, demigods, that sort of thing. And the other side is tempered steel, which is to kill mortals. Now that sort of sword is very rare. Like you don't get a sword like that. Most demigods own celestial bronze because they need that to kill monsters, essentially. And the fact that he has another side to the sword that kills humans is like the biggest like oh my god moment. Like yeah, this guy he can't be trusted, essentially. And Luke takes him deep into the forest and he tells Percy that he's leaving Camp Half-Blood. And he shows him a scorpion, which is his friend, which he always has the motive to kill Percy. If you haven't worked that out by now, you're bloody dumb. If you haven't worked it out that Luke is the traitor, there is something wrong. And Luke talks about his hatred for the gods. They're his enemy, and that Kronos is his new master, and that he's going to bring the golden age. And he tells Percy that he stole the Master Bolt and the Helm of Darkness, and that he summoned the Hellhound that Percy gets attacked by, so that he would be forced to go on a quest by Chiron. So that Chiron basically would send him on the quest to try and protect him, essentially. And then Percy discovers that the winged shoes that Luke gave him were supposed to drag him into Tartarus, because obviously he had the backpack with the Master Bolt in it. The shoes were supposed to drag him straight into Tartarus so that the Master Bolt could be delivered to Kronos so that he could come back. And then, eventually he gets bitten by the scorpion, and Luke uses his sword to cut a veil and run through it and disappear, basically. And Percy eventually passes out with the scorpion venom running through him. And he wakes up in the infirmary surrounded by Annabeth, and I think Chiron's there as well. And it's just Annabeth just can't believe that Luke would do something so evil. Now that is such a big part of this book, and I think a lot of the Percy and Annabeth relationship tension is the fact that Annabeth just supposedly can't get over her feelings for Luke, because it's quite obvious that she does like him. Like let's not deny it. Like she did like him. It is a big thing Uncle Rick gives you the biggest hint at the beginning of the book. And I think a lot of their relationship tension is that she just doesn't believe that he's so evil and that he could possibly do that. She's still hanging on to this hope that he's going to change, which, spoiler alert, doesn't ever happen, essentially. And then Annabeth tells Percy that she's actually leaving Camp Half-Blood for a year. She's going to go and stay with her dad because of what Percy told her, to reach out to him. And she's taken his advice on board and she's leaving. And then Annabeth tells him that, when we come back to Camp Half-Blood, you know, they're going to find Luke and they're going to go on another quest, essentially, together. And then after she's gone and he realizes that Grover's left to go on his quest, Annabeth's gone home to reconcile with her father, he realizes that there's probably no place for him at Camp Half-Blood. Like, his best friends have gone. Maybe it's time for him to go home as well. And he decides that he's going to leave Camp Half-Blood. And that's where the book ends. Oh, it was so good. So let's talk about my final thoughts and feelings about the book. So the book was such an incredible ride. Like, there's so many emotional moments. It had a bittersweet ending. There's so much adventure and fun, but there's also these moments of, what's the word I'm looking for here? Peril, and it's scary at times when you read it, but it was so much fun. It's such a ride. I love the book. And it's such a fantastic introduction to this universe. Like, for people that are not part of the Riordanverse already or have just started out, like, I couldn't put that book down. Like, I wanted to carry on reading, and it's obviously I had to slow myself down because I was taking the notes for this podcast at the same time. But yeah, it's such a great opening, and yeah, it's probably one of the best openings I've read in a long time. And there were so many emotional and intense scenes. The whole relationship between Sally and Percy is so beautiful. And it is the foundation of this book because everything that Percy is because of his mother. And as you go across the books, the more I'm going to start talking about this, you guys are going to realize that everything she's taught him applies to his life, not only in the mortal world, pardon me, and the world that he's part of now, which is the demigod world. Each character had such a good storyline. Like, I love that Rick talks about Grover's wanting to be a searcher and his dreams. I love that it goes into Annabeth's backstory to a certain extent that gets touched on more in the next book. I love that it talks Rick gives a spotlight to Luke's hatred for the gods, why he hates his dad. I like that Rick goes into that sort of detail. Obviously, Chiron, Mr. D, all these people that are going to be part of this world and who are part of Percy's beginning in this journey are so important. And the way Rick creates characters, he's one of the best authors at creating characters, I think, because he can create characters that you love to bits, and he also creates characters that you absolutely hate. And I love that about him. I love that he can write both sides. Not a lot of authors can do that, so I'm very, very grateful to Rick's writing. And I love that the ending kind of it is a cliffhanger, but it's not at the same time. Like, it's almost like you want to read on, like you want to know about the next quest that Annabeth and Percy are going to go on. You want to know, like, if Grover finds Pan, and it's just, yeah, and I'm really excited because the next book is Sea of Monsters, and there's a lot more Clarice in there, a lot more Luke in there. You get to explore relationships in a different dynamic. There's obviously the introduction of Tyson, who I'm going to be talking about as well. And yeah, it was a good base. Like, it was a good place to start to lay the foundation of this universe, essentially, and to introduce people to this character of Percy Jackson and all his friends and what they're going to go through. And it's one of the more light-hearted books, I think, because I want to say from Titan's Curse to Last Olympian, it gets dark. Like, it's not as dark as Heroes of Olympus, but it does get dark, and it gets scary at times as well. And that's the thing. Like, with maturity, like, I think about it as like Harry Potter as well. Like, the first two, like, let's go off the movies and the books, they're quite light-hearted, but as you go through the books from Prisoner of Azkaban till the end, like, it's so um it gets more mature and it gets scarier and darker, and that's exactly what you want to see. Like, what I love about this series is that it grows with the audience. Like, it really does give you, like, these innocent kids who have been thrown because of this prophecy into a dark world. And yeah, I really like that, and I really appreciate Rick's writing style, and I'm excited to review the next book, well, the first half of the next, which is Sea of Monsters, which like I said, I read the first half of the book yesterday and took the notes. I've got the second half to go, and then I'll be recording the episode sometime next week. what I've done is, because obviously I've had to split the books in half, I'm going to be uploading back to back. So I think part one of my review went up maybe 2 days ago or something, and I'm going to put this one up today as soon as I finish recording. And yeah, so stay tuned for my first half of the review of Sea of Monsters. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying rereading the books. It's a lot of fun. I've been rambling on for 45 minutes. My God. Do you know what? I never fail to surprise myself with how much I can ramble, especially. But I guess the way I view it is it shows I'm passionate about it, and it's something that I genuinely love. So thank you guys so much for listening in. I really appreciate it. I'm so sorry episodes are so long. I'm sorry I talk too much, and I will speak to you guys in the next episode. Thank you so much for listening. Mwah. I really, really appreciate it, and I will see you guys with the next book. Mwah. Bye.